Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. Beautiful morning. And today we are glad here to start our panel, which is panel C, under the theme Policies and Practices to Support the Transition to Open Science and Research. We have three rich, beautiful presentations, and we hope that you enjoy listening to them. First of all, I will introduce the presenters, and I will give you here a brief information or about their bio, so you have at least here an overview about their background for future collaboration. So we welcome Dr. Reem. And Dr. Reem Younis is a research consultant and project manager based in Dubai, UAE. She is also a member of the Select Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the National Council of University Research Administrator. Her 14 years of experience across the US and the Middle East span the higher education, healthcare, and government sector. So welcome, Dr. Reem. And we have Dr. Mohammed Boufaris. Mohammed Boufaris is the head of library operations at the House of Wisdom in Sharjah. Prior to this position, he has worked in academic and also government libraries, both in Morocco and UAE. His library career spans over 20 years in different capacities. Mohammed is currently in the final year of his PhD, so you're doctor to be, inshallah, and we wish you all the best. And his specialization in information studies and interactive media at Temple University, with research investigating the scholarly communication landscape in the UAE, and a focus also on science policy and open access. So welcome, Dr. Mohammed, and we're looking forward for both of your presentation. And we don't forget, we have also another colleague joining us online, Dr. Mometta Colley, and she's live now. Welcome, Dr. Mometta, if you can hear me. And I'm giving here a background about Dr. Mometta. Dr. Mometta Colley is an STI policy researcher at the DST Center for Policy Research in Bangalore, India. And also she's working as a consultant with the International Science Council Future of Scientific Publishing project. Her primary research interest lies in open science, particularly in creating an equitable and inclusive knowledge economy. So welcome, Dr. Mometta, on board. And now we will start with the first presentation, and I'll just here mention the name of the presentation here. It is by Dr. Reem, Fostering Open Science in R&D. It's an exploration of research funders' role. So the floor is yours, Dr. Reem. And here is the pointer, and we will be excellent listeners.
Just a slight correction. I'm not Dr. Reem. I'm Reem. Ms. Reem. So, hi, everyone. Good morning. How are we all doing after the coffee break? Energetic? Yes. Great. So first of all, I'd like to send a big shout out to Knowledge E, Emily, kudos, everyone. Excellent job, and thank you for bringing us all together for the second year in a row to this forum, which opens up a very timely and lively debate about open research in the region and globally. Thank you so much for all of your efforts. We could not be doing what we're doing in regards to open science without all of your efforts. Thank you so much. I would also like to send a big shout out to my collaborator, Dr. Nada Jammoul, who couldn't be here with us today, unfortunately. I'd like to thank her for her unwavering commitment to R&D, to mentorship, to the overall greater good. Nada, we miss you, and I hope you're watching us. Dr. Nada is Director General and co-founder of Impactive, which is a people development consultancy. and she's also an adjunct faculty member at the University of Manchester. As for myself, I'm an independent R&D consultant. And our topic of the day is the role of funding agencies in fostering open science and R&D. So as far as our agenda is concerned, we've broken it down into 7 areas. So we'll start off with an introduction and background about what we did, global and regional trends in the shift towards open science, the value of open science to funding agencies, trends towards open science in the UAE specifically, our findings and results. So we did perform a simple survey, and we'd like to discuss that with you. Opportunities and challenges, and the future outlook for open science in the UAE specifically. So our goal, again, is to assess the relationship between funding agencies and open science and research in the UAE. We had several research questions, and I can broadly group them into 3 different questions. The first question that we asked funders, research funders, is what drives them to embrace open science? And the second question was, how do those agencies leverage open science strategically for their policy decisions and stakeholder engagement in R&D? And we wanted to see if there was an actual trend among UAE funding agencies in terms of including open science principles and open science overall in their calls for proposals, and therefore in the proposals that they receive. I'm going to skim through this very briefly. There's a whole bunch of references towards the end of my slides, so please feel free to go through them. Why open science is a question that we're often asked here, because a lot of people, I want to say that the understanding of open science is anemic at best right now in the UAE. So I found this infographic from the University of Cape Town very well encompassing of the whole principles of open science, and they grouped them into 6 different areas. In that, open science touches upon quality and integrity of research. It provides economic benefit, provides global benefits, also plays a role in public disclosure and engagement, and it also plays a role in innovation and efficiency in R&D. As far as the global background is concerned, we know that the UNESCO, OECD, US funding agencies, the European Commission have well-established adoption of open science principles and practices. So for instance, the UNESCO recommendation on open science includes a definition, shared values, guiding principles, a set of actions that are conducive of open science. The OECD open science principles were actually coined in 2006, and in 2021 the OECD reaffirmed those principles, and some of those principles are openness, efficiency, transparency, sustainability, and quality. As far as the US federal funding agencies are concerned, they are celebrating 2023 as a year of open science, and the European Commission through Open Research Europe, which also requires that all data that underlies their research is submitted to them, is shared. In keeping with the theme of global trends towards open science, I'd like to discuss 3 facets of that, and namely those are the global adoption, international collaborations, and benefits for global research. If we look at the global adoption aspect of this, a simple search of DOAJ shows that the number of open access journals in 2023 is at 20,000, and we can compare that to 16,000 in 2022, which is a significant rise in a single year. So we can see that the appetite is there. We're looking at open data initiatives. Again, I'm not going to bore you with many examples. I believe that Knowledge is going to be sharing those slides towards the Nodo, so please feel free to review them at a later stage. In terms of international collaborations, we have several well-known examples that we're all very well versed with, such as the Human Genome Project, the International Space Station. Benefits for global research, we know that especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, open research provided the grounds for expediting the process of getting research out there. Now, some of my fellow panelists viewed the expediting of research as sometimes as a bad aspect of open science, but it also provided a lot of leeway for us to get some results in terms of vaccine science out there. Okay, so when we're looking at specifically funding agencies embracing open science, I would like to discuss a few examples. The European Research Council, for instance, which again is at the forefront of promoting open science, in that its open access policy requires all peer-reviewed publications to be open access. The National Institutes of Health in the US has been a pioneer of open science. So an example is the Cancer Genome Atlas, which molecularly categorizes 33 cancer types. And again, we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So in the global sphere, this is very well established. In terms of the value that funding agencies can unlock from open science, it's twofold. They can make use of it in terms of stakeholder engagement and positive impact on the overall R&D ecosystem. We have several examples of both of those benefits to funding agencies. In terms of the regional trend, I found these stats very interesting. So through a simple search that I ran in October of 2023 of DOAJ, out of 22 Arab states, 17 have open access journals, and the associated numbers with each country are listed right next to the name of each country. When I compared that to research that was performed by someone else in January of just this year, which is 10 months ago, the number of states was only 12 as opposed to 17, and the increase in open access journals for Egypt was double, 106%. In Saudi Arabia, that increase is about 30%. And in Iraq, it's about 18%. So significant numbers. It's not going to be equivalent for all Arab countries, but again, we do see the appetite for open science out there. We see most emphasis being put on open science in the region at KAUST, at King Abdulaziz University, Qatar National Library, Egyptian Knowledge Bank, and Khalifa University as well. I want to point that out. Thank you, Emily, for that. And support is being lent to open science advancements and promotion in the region in the form of F.O.R.M, which is bringing us together to discuss this topic. So quite a bit of effort is being put into this aspect of open science, which is outreach and education. A great example, a regional example of open science is the Jordan Open Initiative platform, which is a research infrastructure that integrated with ORCID, and it enables researcher identification. It assigns DOIs to research contributions and therefore allows us to provide proper metadata. So this is a start again for the region. As far as the UAE is concerned, thank you, Dr. Boufaris, I've cited you. The UAE has witnessed a 16-fold increase in research productivity between 1998 and 2017. There's a clear trend towards increased open access publications in the UAE as per a study conducted by UAE University. And again, the universities leading this trend are United Arab Emirates University, Khalifa University, NYU in Abu Dhabi. And we know that open access publications have a higher citation impact over conventional publications, and that there exists a positive relationship between a higher number of co-authors, and especially international co-authors, and open access status of publications. And as an example, Knowledge E and Emirates Scholar Center for Studies and Research are both publishers who make their publications and research contributions available in open access. So that's the trend in the UAE. I'd like to again give you some context about some numbers and stats from the UAE. The UAE expenditure on R&D as a percentage of GDP has risen from 0.96 in 2016 to 1.5 in 2021, placing the UAE at the top place amongst Arab nations and closer to the regional average, MENA regional average of 1.58. some metrics as well. The UAE has witnessed a rapid increase in scientific research and productivity, and some indicators are from 2008 to 2018, there's been a 400% increase in publications indexed in Web of Science. 56% of UAE research was published in journals with impact factor, and the category normalized citation impact of UAE publications rose from 0.76 to 1.24 in that time period. Our surveys and research were concerned with 4 UAE research funders. We either directly surveyed those funding agencies or retrieved the information from publicly available sources. And the funders are Al Jalila Foundation, the Ministry of Education, Sheikh Hamdan Award for Medical Research, and a funding agency that chose to remain anonymous. I'll go through a case study, which is the Ministry of Education in the UAE, since they're one of the few funders that has publicly available information out there. We know that the Ministry of Education provides competitive funding for research only in accredited higher education institutions in the UAE. And we assessed the role of 2 MOE grants in particular. The first being the Student Achievement in Math and Science Research Grant, and the second being the Developing the UAE Gifted and Talented Ecosystem Research Grant. So for the first grant, we know that it provides support in the form of raw data and data analysis and software training to awardees. As far as the second grant is concerned, we know that it stipulates a requirement to provide a plan to ensure longitudinal research sustainability, to ensure continued applicability of presented evidence-based policy recommendations. So we can already see that there's a budding interest in open science, even though it's not explicitly stated as such, but that's what we're looking at. So, and we also know that grant funding may be utilized to support publication costs, not specifically, again, open research or open science publishers, but it does provide funding for publications. So to sum it up, the ministry provides open data to grant awardees and not just funding where it's available. And it partners with grant awardees to help them gain access to further data, again, where available. And it stipulates that research analyses, materials, results are made available. So to sum up our results and findings, in terms of the questions about implementation of open science and calls for proposals, none of the 4 funding agencies that we studied have a stipulation for open science inclusion in their RFPs. Factors behind the transition towards open science. Our findings were that 1 in 4 funding agencies recommends the adoption, non-explicit adoption of open science and open research, which again shows us that there's a budding interest in transitioning towards open science and research. For the factors hindering transition to open science, we gathered and we were able to deduce that lack of information is the primary obstacle hindering that adoption of open science and research. Challenges in enforcing open science requirements. Now that question was deemed inapplicable because there was no requirement to adopt open science or to enforce it. How do they leverage open science? Now, we could see from the information that I provided from the Ministry of Education is that they use it for policy recommendations and the benefits as well, that they're using it for policy decisions and they're using it to increase stakeholder engagement. More of the players in R&D are being involved in the process, namely the awardees, the funding agency, and data providers, other government entities as well. So just a small tabular representation of our research. So when we group it into 3 areas, open science implementation requirement is 0 and 4. OS science recommendation for implementation is 1 and 4. And funders leveraging open science is 1 and 4. So the challenges in adopting open science, and these are insights specifically from the UAE, is that there's a lack of open science policy and practice guidelines. We have limited information and resources. Researchers often cite IP and copyright concerns and fear of exploitation due to lack of legislation and fear of predatory journals, which is what we spoke about earlier here today. And Emily, thank you. Regionally accepted Arabic open science terminology which we require to disseminate supporting resources on open science. And there are, again, concerns about low quality of research and the content, again, of predatory journals. So the current landscape is that at the global and regional global level, it's very well established open science practice and adoption. At the regional level, it's budding in some countries more than others. But for the UAE, the growth is modest, which indicates room for improvement. So future outlook is that despite the existing challenges, there's a clear indication of growing interest and researcher appetite for open science in the region. And therefore, we know that there's a positive trajectory that we can bank on here. Opportunities presented by open science are that it creates a sustainable, transparent, reliable research culture that is fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It strengthens scientific literacy and education. It feeds the pipeline to more open science and collaboration. It provides more oversight to research milestones and output for government funders and research institutions alike. It enables engagement of stakeholders as partners and collaborators, creates a continuum between government, academia, and the private sector, which is basically the transition on the spectrum from basic to applied research and then to experimental development and patents. So we're basically shifting it from the R to the D in the R&D. So finally, our key recommendations for open science adoption in the UAE are that there needs to be a development of a comprehensive open science policy and practice guidelines at the national level. Awareness and training initiatives have to increase. Researcher engagement and collaboration have to be enhanced as well. Research funder adoption of open science practices has to be encouraged as well at a national level. Data sharing through government support has to be facilitated. And this is a comment that we received directly from one of the funders, in that the government sector has to be to provide data in a more accessible manner. And regional collaboration and knowledge sharing also have to be promoted. And our references, which cite Dr. Bufaris and Emily, and thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Reem, for the interesting, rich presentation. And now we are welcoming Dr. Mohammed. And he is the title of his presentation is Addressing the Elephant in the Room, Science Policy as a Driver of Open Science in the UAE. So we are looking forward to see the elephant in the room. Welcome, Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabab. I am not an open science expert in any way, but I am hoping to share some insights from my previous research that I hope you will find useful. I think so many of the things that I'm going to talk about has been discussed or mentioned in the previous few days. So please bear with me. So one of the interesting things that I wanted really to start pointing out is that when we hear people talking about open science in the UAE, it's usually confused with open access. Even the discourse, even the analysis, it's mostly focused on open access. And actually, open access is just a small component of a much larger ecosystem called open science. And the infographic that you see here shows you to what extent the open access component is just one small part of it. And hence, actually, my idea of addressing the elephant in the room, which is the top-down approach, which we usually know in the UAE has to happen before anything takes place. So looking at the open science taxonomy, You can see the major components of open science, and one of them is open access. But if you looked at the end of this infographic, you will see the open science policies. They are applicable to all the main branches of this diagram. So government policies, funders, open access, open data, and so on. And for me, this is important because the policy is encompassing everything that's related to open science, including open access. But before we move on to the policy part, it's very interesting to know that the research landscape in the UAE, to be frank with you, from my experience and the few research that I have done, is not mature enough yet to talk about open science. We are at a stage where we still have to deal with open access as a small component. Yeah. The outputs are very encouraging. The number of open access articles in the UAE is on par with most of the advanced countries, but still there is a lot to do in terms of open access. Like, for example, if we look at the international lists of repositories, there's only one or two from the UAE. If we look at Douage again, it's a big problem. Like my colleague Reem mentioned about 35 or something journals, while we know that in the UAE there is more than 400 open access journals. So the awareness of inclusion, the awareness of the importance of making this research, open access research, visible is not there yet. So what are when I look at the UAE research landscape, there are some enablers of open science. Strong GDP, my colleague again mentioned here, so that the UAE has increased its GDP significantly, and it's in 7th in the global per capita income of nearly 500 billion GDP in 2023. We have a strong and growing research infrastructure. So we had seen in recent years university reforms with the conversion of some of the federal universities into research universities. We have a significant number of research centers have emerged. And we have some collaboration initiatives and some research centers that are mentioned there, like the Dubai Biotechnology and Research and so on. We have also some research national strategies and agendas, like the main one is UAE Vision 2021, which actually started pushing towards more research, and UAE National Innovation Strategy, and then the National Strategy for Higher Education 2030, which are actually enablers for open science. What are the challenges? If we have mentioned all these enablers, there are a lot of challenges. So many universities are still focusing on teaching. And we have even heard in the presentations previously this morning that one of their main and first objective was to support learning. And being someone who has worked in academic institutions in the UAE, I have seen faculty and researchers complaining all the time that the teaching load is too much and we don't have any time for research. And this is a fact that is really there. And one of the main important one for me is the transient research workforce. UAE has a very volatile researchers or very volatile workforce, including the researchers. People come here for a few years, a few months, and then they move on. And we know that research needs stability. Stability of the workforce, the commitment of researchers, but also of funding. And that's one of the problems that we see as a problem for adopting open science. Dominance of expat workforce, again, because they are volatile, they are here one day, they move on to another country the next day. Absence of specialist research management offices. And this is something that I have witnessed in the process of doing research and surveying some of the research universities in the UAE, is that most of the time, the people who are running the research management office are not specialists. They are either an old faculty who has been moved there, or it's just an administrative person who doesn't know anything about the science process, etc. Failure to communicate science to society. And this is a very interesting one, because often when we talk about communication science to society in the UAE, it's usually in the form of statistics. We have published this many articles, we have done this, we have done that. While actually open science is a different story. It should be based on communicating the findings, getting the society engaged in what you are doing in science. We have a fledgling research system, ecosystem, because after all, we are a very young country. The UAE has been established in 1971, and the first university was in 1976, after all. And only 1.44% of the GDP was spent in R&D. I think my colleague has a much more updated figure, which is 1.5. I think it depends from where you get the numbers. Yeah, but still, the UAE spending on R&D is very, very humble. Because if we look at some of the neighboring countries like Israel, like Turkey, it's much higher. Communicating science to society. Communication of science is often performed by researchers themselves, which is a problem, because they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity to communicate the science. Absence of science communication specialists. And while we are talking about that, even the scholarly communication specialists are absent in most of our universities. Reporting is almost restricted to statistics, I mentioned that already, and absence of citizen science initiatives. This is a big one, actually. In the past few years, there wasn't many initiatives on citizen science. There was only one or two. One which never, I think, which was very humble, and there was no tangible results of it. And there is a new initiative by, I think, Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, and we're still to see what the outcome of that would be. Science assessment policy. Again, because when we're talking about open science, we are talking about all these branches and all these subcategories of the science system. And there is an absence of local research assessment policy. And this is very important. Why? Because after all, there is a lot of research that comes into Arabic and other languages. And when we use the international databases or scientometric sources, they are always unfair to the Arabic speakers. So there should be some kind of local research assessment policy. Current systems are biased against some researchers, disciplines, and journals. This is a fact. I think even in the north or the global north, but it's much more pronounced in the global south and in regions like the UAE, which don't fall either on the global north or the global south. And such policy ensures high-quality local journals are given value on par with those indexed in SCI or Scopus. Okay, what are the benefits of this policy? Is fair performance-based research funding. Yeah, so free national research from SCI and Scopus worship. I think China did a very good initiative where they built their own science assessment policy, and they started distancing themselves from the Psi worship, as they phrased it. And I think for the UAE, it's Scopus worship, because most of the universities in the UAE are after the QS ranking, and QS ranking uses mostly Scopus as the main source. Enabling local publications to thrive. So it's not only about having a perspective on the journals that are listed in Scopus. And actually, I always hear when we talk about journals and publications in the UAE, the mantra and the biggest word is Scopus, Scopus indexed, which creates a big problem. I have been approached by researchers who publish in Arabic, and they say, okay, now as part of the promotion, the university is asking us to publish this many numbers in Scopus index journals. How do we do that? So in the absence of science assessment policy that is fair to everyone, this is a problem that's gonna be fair assessment of researchers' tenure and promotion. And this is what I just mentioned, is that it's unfair to someone who publishes much more research in Arabic journals, much more impactful research that's related to the problems of this community, that they are treated unfairly. What can we use? There are a lot of success stories that can be used as an inspiration. We have the China, the end of Psi worship that I mentioned. Latin Index has been a good example. And talking about of Latin America, not only in open science but also in open access as a subcategory, they have been doing very well. Because they have been encouraging local journals to convert to open access. There is a Nordic list, and the one I'm very familiar with is JUFO. JUFO in Finland, they have created a database of publications for the country that are used to categorize the publications and to give them a certain ranking. The elephant in the room, yeah. Open access, open science policy actually is a very important component because it influences institutional practices and policies. It influences the OA mandates and funding. It influences the development of open science infrastructures and the engagement in and development of citizen science. So actually, in spite of the research promoting strategies and agendas that we talked about, like the UAE vision, etc., there is no umbrella national science policy, or even a science policy, as we say. No open science policy, no clear institutional support of open science. Like, for example, there is one open access policy listed in a roadmap, and then no open science policies I can find in any of the research institutions in the UAE. And there are a lot of role models. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is the European Open Science Policy, then the US 2023 Year of Open Science, and then South Africa Open Science Policy. The UNESCO has some guidelines on open science policy that we can adopt. And LibSense in Africa has actually released some very good guidelines that can be used. And actually, there is a glimpse of what can be achieved, like the Open Labs in the UAE was a very, very great initiative of the direction towards open science. If you are not familiar with these open labs, it's like a platform enabling researchers to collaborate, but also enabling research from different universities to have access to labs that are available in other UAE institutions in case they don't have that particular lab in their institution. The 6 principles of open science, of course, this is again going back to the basics, but It's very important. Diagram is very important to what I'm going to talk about in the next phase. Because open science capacity building is necessary. And without an open science policy, it is very hard to talk about these components. So we need to promote and make PIDs, infrastructure accessible, incentivizing open science through media exposure, awareness, financial support, and training, support national open science infrastructure development, assist institutions translate national open science policy into practice, promote transparency principles such as open peer review to end nepotism in scholarly publishing. I think this is not only for the UAE, but being familiar with the publishing or the scholarly publishing in the Arab world, there is a lot of nepotism happening in terms of who gets to publish where, and engage local societal actors. I wanted to mention this in this slide, some of the regional champions that we have. There is the Saudi Arabia open science community, and there is the open science community in Egypt, which are very good initiatives as they are helping build the capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, for the insightful, rich presentation. And I can imagine that, like all of you now, also imagining the elephant in the room. So can you see the elephant in the room? Right. We have another speaker, Dr. Mamita, and she's live. But before that, the Q&A session or discussion will be after all the presenter finalize their presentation. So you can write down from now all your questions or suggestions for later on, inshallah. So the next speaker will be Dr. Mamita Koli, and it's a collaborative work actually with Dr. Geoffrey, but she's the one will be presenting. The title of her presentation will be The Foundational Role of Open Access in Open Science, What Can Be Done? So Dr. Momita, if you can hear me and see me, welcome on board. And the floor is yours. You can start sharing your presentation and you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for actually providing with this opportunity to present online, because of some last moment complications, I cannot visit. Yeah, of course, I'm visiting all the colleagues being there. But yeah, still, I think presenting this interesting work that we are doing in International Science Council is a very good opportunity. And I think it's also specifically important because from previous speakers, we already have heard what is happening in open science in the MENA region and is integrating. And of course, I would also tell that what we have done there in part of International Science Council's work for the MENA region. But before I go, obviously, I would also personally like to thank Dr. Emily and Dr. Nahil Nisat for making all this arrangement that I present online, because it was such a last minute complication, as I already have mentioned. So also, as it already been mentioned, that it's a collaborative work between Dr. Geoffrey Bolton, who is Emeritus Professor at University of Edinburgh, and he's also a governing board member of International Science Council. However, the work that I'm going to present is drawn heavily from the expert steering group of International Science Council. So if you don't know, International Science Council, being the global voice of science, has set up a special project. It's called Future of Scientific Publishing. And we have the global experts from all the region representing the steering group of that project. And there has been a lot of discussion, brainstorming on how the future of scientific publishing should look like. From the previous speakers, we have heard that open access obviously are part of the whole ecosystem of open science, but it's very central, because if we cannot fix the system of science, and which is so closely related with scientific publishing, we really won't be able to achieve the ultimate goal of the open science, where we want to make science more accessible to the society, or make science work for the immediate wicked challenges that the whole globe is facing. So let me go to my overview slides, that what I would be talking today. First, I would try to take you back to the history of open science, because we see a lot of misunderstanding in understanding of open science itself. So I will take you back to the history, then I will slowly take you to the current situation where we are in, and what the digital revolution has presented us in form of a revolution that we can really see in our science ecosystem. Then I would take you also through that where we are progressing in open access, and obviously probably not a lot of ways where we are not progressing. And then I would present you the International Science Council's 8 principles, which should the scientific publishing system now follow to move towards the future. And of course, we will discuss the role of science policies overall in this. Okay. So as I said, that I would take you back a little bit to the history, because when we are talking about open science, we kind of having a misunderstanding that this is kind of a very new concept, open science, but that's exactly not that. If we go back to the history, 16th century and all, the science used to be very close. And wealthy patrons of Europe would fund science, and the results would really be guarded, well-guarded secrets. But all this started to change when the scientific journals came in. That was really an innovation that changed the whole system. And scientific societies used to publish this journal. And along with that came another method of science, which is also really the backbone of the whole science ecosystem that we have in presence. That is the peer review system, and providing evidence of the truth claim that we have, and the peers will scrutinize that. So if you see from this late 17th century till now, the 21st century itself, we are following the same methods of doing the science in this way. And here, of course, you can see one of those early journal picture. Many of you must be knowing this, the Philosophical Transactions by the Royal Society, which is considered as really the pioneering in scientific publishing. And also one of the things that I should really mention before going back to this next slide is that from the 17th century, we consider science as a public good. But it started to change in 20th century. But how? Let me also go to this, really the dawn of science policy now. If you see that the World War II has changed the scientific publishing ecosystem a lot, because from the World War II perspective, we have seen that not everybody has seen that the power of scientific innovation, science and technology. A lot of lives were saved because of penicillin compared to previous wars. So it was very understandable that why many countries now started to institutionalize science policies. They really had their science policies starting obviously from the US. And because of that public funding in science, we started to produce a huge amount of knowledge. And then definitely we needed a lot more outlet than the society-run journals. And that is where the commercial publishers entered into the system. So it is like around 1950s onwards where the commercial publishers entered into this ecosystem. And then things started to change, because see, for then almost for 300 or more years, it was run by scientific societies. Now commercial entities came into picture, and then commercialization of the whole process started. And at some point, obviously, we started to see the problems. Many of us, especially, of course, the global south countries, face the challenges much more. The subscription fees of this journal were so high that most of the researchers did not have any access to most of the important research of the world that was happening. And this started to paramount in such a way that we had the next problem. I know that the previous speaker again mentioned about the publish and perish. Because right now we have this problem that we are forced, as a researcher, we're forced to publish too much. And the quality of our research is now assessed by something called, let's say, journal impact factor. How many citations we have, what is our H index? None of this actually reflects the true quality of anyone's work. If we go back to the scientometrics, that is the science of the science, we would realize that how feeble this such kind of metrics are to judge the quality of research. So in this backdrop, and when the digital revolution has started, people have realized that we have to bring change into the scientific publishing system. Obviously, I already mentioned that how problematic the inequity in the whole system has become. And digital technology now provided us to move away from the print version, which was obviously much more expensive, to come to a digital version, and it should have been much, much cheaper. And there are this call for open access. This were really, again, the dawn of open access movement, I would call, that the Budapest, and Berlin Declaration. And the Budapest Declaration actually introduced the term, the green in open access, because we know that we talk about repository. So the Budapest open access laid down these foundational principles of open access, that the researcher can make their article open access through repositories or publishing through an open access journal. Now comes the another challenges. But before going to those challenges, let me take you through those terminology, because the green open access is the one where we deposit, it's the self-archiving. So if we deposit the accepted version of our publication into a repository. But of course, there later on the challenges of embargoes came, so that publishers put an embargo that you cannot put before 1 or 2 years to an open repository. Then we had open access journals. But right now, the challenges with many of these open access journal, apart from the predatory publishing, if we even many legitimate good open access journals, but they charge really very high article processing charge. I'm sure many of the researchers globally face this challenge, as they have to pay at least an article processing charge of, on an average, $2,000 to $3,000 to make their publication open access. The best option, of course, could be the diamond open access. So the journal which is run by societies and do not charge any to publish, but makes the content open access. So they do not charge any article processing to the researchers, because the funding usually comes from government, universities, and so on. But obviously those funding have their own challenging with long-term sustainability. And then there is this hybrid journals, which are still subscription-based. So many would still subscribe, but who have the money to make their article open access, then they can make it open access. That is again kind of in double dipping and quite challenging in our opinion. So let us now discuss what we have made the progress, because as you see that in the previous slides, I talked about the history, the open access movement that was early 2000. Now in 2023, where we are standing, how much progress we have made. It's important because I don't think that I really have to put this on emphasize that why open access is so important. COVID-19 pandemic has showed us that why we cannot have the knowledge behind a paywall anymore. But obviously, what are the progress, as I was saying, that we have many countries, not just the US, has public access policies, or many called as an open access policy. So that put an emphasis mostly on putting the accepted version of the manuscript in a repository. So that's why repositories are very important. We need to have a very strong repository system in every country, and also it's important to have them interoperable with each other. And then the plan is, which is a coalition of funders, mostly from European countries, but also there is Wellcome Trust and private funders like Wellcome Trust. Also, Bill Melinda Gates' plan. Part of plan is then they had several principles to make article open access. Overall, they want to move the whole publishing ecosystem to an open access system. But we should really mention the Latin American initiative, because that's where all the region can learn a lot from. They have many journals which are funded by the government and the university system. And in the whole Latin American ecosystem, they are very connected with each other. And they also promote local language publishing. I'm sure just now I heard that in UAE, or even overall in the MENA region, the Arabic journals, the journals which use Arabic as the language, is not very well recognized. But however, I think there is a lot to learn from the Latin American initiative, that how they can come together and also try to make sure that these Arabic journals are indexed in Scopus. It's not impossible, it can be done as well. So I think the region has a lot to learn from there, to see that how they can benefit from a collective voice to make their journals visible in the global landscape. And there is always an option with that AI and machine learning and everything, that it can, at least an abstract can be translated to languages like English, so that everybody can understand that what's been presented as a research. Then I would like to mention that another important initiative that had progressed the open access movement is the Directory of Open Access Journal. This is also an important learning for everyone who wants to publish in open access, that if a journal is indexed in DOAJ, then we can and be more or less sure that those are not really a predatory journal. And in the science publishing or science policy perspective, the governments in the MENA region can consider that if a journal is indexed in DOAJ and the researchers are publishing it, that can be considered in their career progression. Because just now we again heard that researchers face these challenges, that their work is not recognized because it's not indexed in Scopus. So there can be an initiative to include DOAJ also. Many countries have done that. Many universities also have done that, that DOAJ indexed journals and can also be included in the career progression. And finally, I would like to mention this transformative agreement and read and publish deal. This is also making a lot of progress in making research article open access. Maybe you probably would have heard or see this in news, in research professional news or someone, that let's say Springer Nature has, for example, one of the very recent was that Springer Nature has signed this transformative agreement in the Greater China region. So obviously transformative agreements are playing a bigger role in promoting open access. However, let us discuss before discussing, I want to discuss the challenges, especially with the transformative agreements, but let's have a quick look. I just did a very quick search in Web of Science and see where do the countries stands in terms of making their the research output open access. Because it's been like around 25 years from first open access movement, the Budapest one, and where do we stand? If you see, it's a Web of Science listing that which are the major knowledge producers in the world. And if you see that we still are hovering around 40%, and some countries is still like India or China, which are kind of produce a lot of knowledge, but still their progress in open access is not that great yet. Some countries like UK or Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, all have made much more progress. And also another interesting part is to see that what kind of open access is getting more prominence. The green open access, obviously, that is that doesn't involve any cost except for the repository, running the repository, which is really nominal. So that some countries are taking that seriously, but many countries are not doing that. However, if you see the blue one, that is actually the gold and diamond model. And to be honest, the gold model, that is the paid, APC paid model, actually is dominating the open access spectrum. This is something which I also wanted to highlight, that there is a good movement towards pre-printing, which is another form of open access. And I will discuss in little what pre-printing exactly is about in my after some slides. But the previous slide shows, sorry, I probably have moved a little faster, but if you see archive, of course, the most popular preprint, and the social science archive, research square, these are the most prominent preprint surplus at this point. And though the growth is not really phenomenal, but we slowly see some growth in preprinting.
Sorry, Dr. Mamita, if you can just like speed up to wrap up, so we can also have the Q&A session.
So how much more minute do I have?
I'll give you 5 more minutes. Okay.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I already had mentioned a problem with the high article processing charge, and because of this transformative agreement, many of these journals are pushing to make more and more open access journal and pushing the researchers to pay open access charges. We see some potential solution, of course, a subscribe to open model, because in that case, many of the journals are still on the subscription mode, but since the libraries are making this as, if the libraries are committed to subscribing this journal, then the contents of the whole journal is been open, making it open access. In this regard, the PLOS Global Equity Program is also very interesting, because it's showing, based on the World Bank status of the economic status of the countries are getting the discounts on their article processing charge. And then, of course, this is going more towards an open and equitable model, because the PLOS, of course, being an open access journal, has an article processing charge. But because of the Global Equity Program, everyone now would get much equal chance to publish there. Okay. Now coming back to the other progress in open science, or open science in open access, would obviously be the digital object identifier. So we just now also heard from the previous speaker why it is important, but I would like to put a little bit more details on this open peer review system, because the wealth of knowledge we have in the form of peer review, it's always hidden behind somewhere. We never get to see, but the model that eLife or F1000 research has adopted has made it much more faster. Now it's like a model based on preprint. So you first put your first version, the preprint, into the workflow of that journal. Then it undergoes peer review in the open domain. So you can see the peer review report. You can judge what the reviewers think about the paper, not just reading the paper. That's a wonderful model that we believe in International Science Council, that all the research should be, or the publication work should start follow the open peer review model. And open data repository, because we need more and more open data repository, and each and every research that we publish should have the underlying data and the raw data in the open data repository. And we, of course, can have a DOI for this particular data set that we are putting into the repository corresponding to a paper, because that it can really be, you can cite the data as well. And the peer review preprint actually is the model that eLife and F1000 is following. And we strongly believe that that is the future model that can be used. And this is a schematic where we see that open access really is the center of the open science. If we can achieve it, a lot of other things can be achievable in future if we can fix that particular problem. Now coming to the International Science Council's work with the global expert, as I had mentioned, we have come up with these 8 principles. for the future of scientific publishing. Of course, we should have universal open access to record of science, and open licensing is also very important, because the publisher should not hold the license, because it's our work as a researcher and we should hold the license for it. They should not even charge to us to put it on a repository, which recently American Chemical Society is doing. These are really harmful for the overall science ecosystem. Already had mentioned about why peer review, open peer review is important, and also the why data is important. And here, to have everything open for the future generation, DOI is a very important enabler, and everyone should use also the ORCID ID. For every researcher should use such kind of PIDs. And we also have to respect the publication bibliodiversity. And obviously, it should be continuous, the peer review. It's not a static model that we believe that is important. The lack of time, I will just quickly show you that some of the work that we have done in the International Science Council. You can see this normalizing preprint paper. This really laid down why this peer review preprint model is one of the best way for the science to go forward, or scientific publishing to go forward. We also had recently in this year did a workshop in the MENA region to make the researcher understand importance of open science, and also why should we try to adopt newer model, and why we should go away from this traditional impact measure like impact factor or journal or citation and everything. So this is the call for reform for our side, that we think that as a collective effort from all the region, and this has been, and we are still doing a lot of consultation with various regions, and want to respect each region's perspective into it. So we should make that science is a public good, and we have to abandon this bibliometric indices, which is really related to various commercial entities, and even QS ranking is one of that commercial endeavor, which we should move away from. And that's why we need non-commercial source agnostic indices, improve functionality, because the digital revolution has provided us opportunities, and we should use those. So we don't need a static publishing system anymore. And we really want everyone collective to raise our voice and make the system more equitable for all of us. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Messaikeh. Very insightful and rich information. And I'm sure also my colleagues also sharing me the same. All the three presentations are rich and interesting. So now we open the door for the Q&A. And of course, the door is open for our attendees to ask our speakers and presenters today. So yes, start asking the questions. And I guess we have still Dr. Messaikeh. She can receive also, Dr. Messaikeh can receive the questions.
I have a question actually to Professor Bouffars. You spoke about elephant in the room and spoke about institutional policies not actually encouraging the open science, open access. And I find from my institution, I represent Carnegie Mellon in Qatar, that it's very difficult to approach researchers and ask about opening the data or even putting something in institutional repository if funder is not requiring it, because he who has the gold makes the rules. And they usually only follow this when they're required to do it. So it's kind of difficult to do, to require institution to do something on a local level when the funder level is not there. So why do we call it an elephant? It's a logic of life.
I think your question is open. Yeah, I think your question includes the answer, because without that umbrella or overarching science policy in the state that mandates the movement to open science, institutions are left to make their own decisions, or be subject to the dictations of funders. But if there is a national science policy which clearly states that we move to open science, and these are the principles, and these are the rules and regulations and guidelines for funding and for publications and so on, then it will make a difference. So I think already your question has the answer. Thank you. I hope.
Can I also ask a question to the previous presenter? Because at the end of your presentation, you gave us a lot of recommendations. And I'm just curious, are this recommendation is just some words on paper, or are they kind of given to government structures and you expect some kind of action on it?
So as far as implementation goes, it depends on at the national level. So the role of an enabling entity or an initiative such as F.O.R.M is for them to gather the recommendations from us, the speakers or the experts, and present them and make them available to the decision makers and the policy makers. Are they words on paper? I'm not sure. Will they be applied? I'm not sure, but we know what the recommendations are. Yeah.
Actually, I have something to add, because if there is a clear science policy, the funders themselves will see the benefit of adopting it. And they will see that there is a win-win situation, and that they can change the approach. And sometimes it's just because of the awareness. Some of the funders, they are not aware that you are getting published anyway, your research is going out there, but you make a choice of making it open or making it closed, for example, in case of open access. It's for the same amount of money, I would say.
I have a question, and I hope that you have insights about this. Do you think the inclusion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in the QS ranking would maybe lead to stronger open research effort in the region?
Is your, sorry, just like, is your question to all the
Yeah,
speakers open to you all? Yeah, sorry.
The easiest answer is I am not an expert in sustainable development goals, but I think anything that we can use to help the argument and to use and to support the ideas that the experts are presenting towards the movement to open science can be useful. And I see the use of SDGs as a supporting argument here.
I completely agree with Dr. Boufaris. The UE greatly adopts the UN SDGs, and it's, again, as you said, used as a supporting argument to make the case for many new initiatives. So yeah, I hope that it does make the stance that yes, the shift should happen. Slowly but surely it should happen.
If I may interject here a little bit, because we do a lot of work on the ranking. A major challenge is, if you see, like Times Higher Education now have a sustainable development goal, how the institutions are going towards sustainability. But if you see, there are many such kind of sustainable development achievement by institution, that kind of ranking. And those are in a way very arbitrary. One ranking has no, let's say, overlap with the other, and it can be really random. So what exactly we are measuring? Because they actually use publication as an indicator and use certain keywords in the publication to make if it is aligned with the sustainable goal. So we have to be very cautious on whether we want, then it's the institution's own responsibility to come up with such kind of, let's say, narrative or statement, instead of using, let's say, QS ranking or some ranking for including them in let's say, convincing the policymaker, because then it will again be driven by certain numbers. And we already have seen what was the problem if a research is driven by journal impact factor or so. So I would put my caution against using commercial ranking for defining sustainable or achievement in sustainable development goal. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mamita, and all the presenters. Any other questions, please? Yeah, contribute or suggest.
Yeah, so I'm Sai Through Carnegie Mellon University based in the US. And in that category of anything to help drive us towards open science, I testified in front of the US Congress a few years ago, and I met with some of the staffers afterwards and had a very illuminating conversation with them where they basically said a lot of these open science policies are to drive economic activity, basically to help the private sector. So you can imagine how the Microsofts, Googles, and even small companies benefit from open science, maybe as much as researchers do directly. So particularly in light of what the Minister of Education yesterday said about the large Arabic language model, is that a potential driver in this region in terms of economic activity for not only the large tech companies, but local companies as well?
So I'm trying to understand your question better. It's adoption of open science towards economic activity, improved economic activity, correct?
Particularly for the private sector.
For the private sector, okay. So based on the information that I have, the data that I have, basic science, the whether it be in the US or in the UAE, basic science is mostly happening in the universities, higher education institutions, whereas the applied research and R&D in particular are happening in the private sector. So definitely it's a no-brainer, and that's why we're trying to push so hard for this adoption to be expedited here, in that in terms of economic development and growth, it really is such a driving force in that, whether it be from, let's say, the NSF, the National Institute for Statistics as part of the NSF, or from the statistics agencies here in the UAE, we know where the R&D is happening. Mostly it's in the private sector. So if this is the best way to support that economic development and foster it, then yes. And that's definitely one of the drivers that should be pushing for some national level adoption of OS practices. Yeah.
Anyone would like to elaborate? Dr. Muhammad, Dr.
No, I don't, because she is an expert in her area in R&D. So that question was related to R&D, and I think she elaborated very well on that. If I may add something, I think the UAE is part of a larger global ecosystem, and the scholarly publishing, if I understand, is dominated by the same players, whether it's in the US or in the UAE. So whatever you think is applicable to the UAE market is applicable here. Again, because the majority of our publications go into Scopus indexed journals because of this push for tenure and promotion, and linking the rankings of the university to the QS. So I think it's applicable.
Answered your question, would it?
It's just a general question for everyone. Can we see like an Arab, let's say, index on the horizon, or like an association or something that will start measuring journals according to the requirements and according to the standards of the region? Can we see something like this on the horizon?
I think there are some initiatives, but again, they are commercially dominated, and that's the problem. And that's why when I talked about science assessment policy, it's very important that it would be state controlled and that it's national to each country, where, or even regionally, like for example in the GCC, where there is some kind of science assessments which takes into account the local publications alongside the international ones or the ones indexed in Scopus. Yeah, but there is an initiative between Clarivate, there is the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, and there is e-Ma'rifa initiative. They have some kind of work being done in that regard.
Yes, I will say like most are like individual, as Dr. Muhammad said, like here, individual efforts and initiatives. They need to go, of course, to the international stage more to be more visible. Inshallah, if someone like can adopt that, I mean, like the work and make it like more popular internationally rather than locally.
Very simple question again to Dr. Boufaras. One phrase triggered me in your presentation. You said that communication of research is left to authors. And I don't agree with this because I think as soon as the article is published, it's kind of catched by Google Scholar, Google, and it goes in the world. What do you mean by this and how else can we communicate research?
Okay.
If not.
I think my statement was misunderstood, and this is my chance to correct it, is when I'm talking about communicating science to society. Right now, for example, when I publish an article, it's up to me to post it on Instagram, on Twitter, and talk about it, and come to a conference like this to talk about it, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Usually there is no system in place in the universities that I know of in the UAE, for example, to expose the publications or scientific findings to society. Of course, the Google Scholar and other indexes, they are based on PIDs and so on, but that's not exposure that I mean. It's not communicating science to society, which is the immediate people who need that research. Like, for example, my research, when I do my research about open access, it's published, it's visible in Google Scholar, it's visible somewhere, etc., etc. But the people at the universities here don't see it unless I communicate it to them or I talk about it. Yeah, I hope that clarifies the.
If I may add a point, research that is communicated is mostly research that is high in the indices or the metrics. So I was part of the Ministry of Education for a while, and one of the initiatives that the minister spoke about yesterday in his keynote address was the innovation umbrella, which consists of a innovation majlis, a magazine that speaks about research that's happening in higher education institutions. And the other one is the magazine, the other is a webinar series that again highlights key research in the country. But again, we're talking about most visible in the indices, in the metrics. Now, what Dr. Boufaras is talking about is what about the normal researchers? You know, how is it getting highlighted? How is it getting communicated? Certain universities have their own internal magazines or let's say newsletters where they're highlighting that. I'm not sure what their metrics or measures are, to what kind of research they do support and highlight and communicate about. But they should be, I think, speaking about up and coming researchers, to provide them with the support and you know, highlight in media and PR that they need, that push forward that they wouldn't often find, especially here.
For example, I would add something to that. Like the university which I am affiliated with, we see that, for example, as part of the research management office, there is someone who works with researchers to highlight what they are doing, not only when they publish, but even in the process itself. So and so is working on this problem, and this problem and these solutions will have impact on you guys. It's in the language of the layman. You know, you talk to the population, you tell them that so and so is working on improving traffic management, for example, and we expect that the outcome of this research will benefit you in this way or that way. And when the research is published, again, they take the initiative and they expose or they rewrite the research in very basic terms for society. And this is what I understand, what I meant by communicating the science.
Yeah. Science comms is definitely a field that has to grow here. That we know that the number of science communicators in the country is very limited, and I think that as a field at a national level, they're looking at improving that number for sure. We definitely know that it's a field that students can get into and study now. So yeah, it's getting the attention that it requires. I think now it just needs time to grow. I hope.
We'll take a final question.
Yes, final question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you, Ms. Reem, about this nice show. Dr. Mohammed, I would like to ask you, in your presentation, you are mentioning open peer reviewer. What's that mean, please?
Okay, we are talking now. It's a new concept, not quite new, but I think even Dr. Momita mentioned it, like the eLife and F1000 research is the full transparency of the research process. It enables when you submit an article to a journal, then the whole peer review is transparent. It's available to everyone to see. This is the reviewer's comments. This is your rebuttal. This is how you fix the problem. This is how you addressed it. It's all visible. And you can find already a lot of examples through some of the platforms that Momita mentioned. And this guarantees that we part with some negative practices, basically, and also to make sure that there is solid scientific principles based on reproducibility of. We also avoid falsification, fabrication of data, and so on and so forth. And in the Arab world, I know, for example, that a lot of editors, they don't stick to exactly to the principles of peer review. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all attendees, for attending and for your good listening, and also for your contribution. And we wish you all the best. And you can enjoy your break now. Thank you, Dr. Ms. Reem and Dr. Mohammed. Thanks a lot, Dr. Momita, for being committed and attending the session. And we hope that you can also continue attending the online sessions and enjoy them. Thank you so much.